Hi there, my name's Dominic Burrows. I'm one of the Dev Neuro Academy tutors for the 2021 Academy. I've been working in neuroscience now for about 4 to 5 years. I'm currently doing my PhD at King's College London. Um, just a bit of background on how I got there. I started, I went to a school in West London and was quite interested in studying chemistry in particular. From that, I then went to study at UCL, where I studied natural sciences, and that was a good chance for me to study loads of different types of sciences, from physics to biology. And that was where I started to kind of get a bit of an understanding of some of the processes that happen in the brain and different brain disorders, and that was really interesting. So when I finished that degree, I decided to take a master's in clinical neuroscience at King's. So that was looking at neuroscience, but with a very, very kind of patient, clinical-led focus. So looking at trying to develop treatments and improve patient care, that kind of thing. And then from that, I applied for a PhD at King's, and I was really lucky to get onto the program. Um, which is kind of what I've been doing now for the last 3 years. So before I started the PhD, well, the PhD that I'm on has a kind of a route where you take a year to rotate in different labs. So at the center, at the CDN, I did different projects in different labs, and there that gives you a really nice chance to look at a diversity of different projects. So I was looking at, for example, trying to look at the more clinical side, where I was looking at data from patients who have schizophrenia and looking at how the structures of their brain change as a consequence of the brain pathology. I also did a project that was more based in a lab, where I was looking at different connections between neurons in the mouse cortex. And then I also did a rotation in a lab where we were looking at behaviour of different animal models of autism, and I was using zebrafish to do that. And so from that, I then kind of went into my PhD, which is what I'm doing now. So I'm currently in the final year of my PhD, and during my PhD, I use zebrafish, which are a type of fish, obviously, and it's a model organism which has become quite popular in the last few years because their brains are completely transparent, so you can actually see into the whole brain. And this allows you to then look at what's going on inside. You can express different reporters of cellular activity to then see, oh, well, how is the activity changing over time across individual neurons, but also across the whole brain. And so for my PhD, what I do is use this method to try and understand, firstly, how is the activity in the brain actually organized across the whole brain? Because this is something we can't really tell in humans, because we firstly, the brain is too big, but secondly, we don't have the techniques to actually image inside through the skull. So I can try and understand how the brain is organized to optimally allow us to behave, optimally allow us to process information, optimally allow us to respond to information, respond to inputs, that kind of thing. And then I use that as a framework to understand what happens when the brain goes wrong. And particularly, I'm looking at epilepsy. So epilepsy is a brain disorder which affects a large number of people in the world, and the most common sort of symptom of it is having seizures, which are these abnormally synchronous brain events, brain activity that can then affect movement, they can affect consciousness, all these different things. And so I use the zebrafish again to then try and understand how the patterns of activity that are causing the seizure actually occur, and what we can try and do to stop them. So why am I interested in science? Well, I think it's a real privilege, really, to be able to study and work in a field where the main focus is trying to just understand something for its own sake. So a lot of science and a lot of neuroscience is really looking at how do we, what do we not know about the brain, and how, what can we learn? And obviously, the more we learn about the brain, the more that we can just understand ourselves. So that's something I really love about it, is that everything that I study, I feel like it helps me better to understand myself and how I respond to, the environment around me. And I think that's really, really cool. But another level to that is that from the things we learn about the brain, there are then many, many potential applications. So you can look at benefits to patients when we're trying to understand brain pathology. But you can also look at, the development of neural networks in machine learning. A lot of that comes from our understanding of the brain. So I think there are many, many amazing applications to studying the brain that we as a society will benefit from. And one of my favorite parts of the whole PhD process has been being involved with things like Dev Neuro Academy, through kind of science communication and science outreach. And honestly, it's one of my favorite parts of the PhD, because when you're doing the research, while it's fun, you often feel you're quite removed from the outside world, because you're stuck in a lab and you're doing your research, which makes a small bit of a puzzle of the kind of bigger puzzle. But because of that, it's quite easy to then sort of lose sight of why you're doing it, or what is the potential kind of benefit to other people. And then also you lose a sense of perspective, because you get so used to doing it on a daily basis that you don't realize how cool it is. And so that's one of the reasons I love outreach, because you get such a fresh perspective from these people you're talking to, and that is a really nice reminder of the fact that what you're doing is really interesting. But also I find that people who are maybe new to neuroscience or trying to get into it for the first time, they don't carry the same dogma or the same patterns of thinking that we have developed and that we've carried through generations. So, I inherit some of the bad habits that the previous scientists before me have. Whereas you guys, because you'll be like a tabula rasa, like a blank slate, and so you'll be able to ask the questions that we won't. That's one of the best things I think about science communication, is that engaging with people who are new to their field will actually, you will have some of the you'll be able to ask some really, really interesting and amazing questions. And in terms of any advice or kind of suggestions I would have for you guys, if you were interested in pursuing a career in science more generally, or in kind of STEM fields, what I would say is follow your passion, follow what you're interested in. Obviously, if a lot of STEM fields do require you to go to get a university degree, and so if this is something you feel like it's an end goal of yours, then I would definitely recommend that. And it obviously is important to have a good sense of what kind of broad field you want to be involved in, but don't be too worried about picking the exact thing, because things are going to change, and fields, while at school you have the different disciplines like biology, chemistry, physics, maths, they're all different. In reality, every field is massively overlapping. So what I would say is just go with what you're interested in, go with what you feel like you're good at, and then take the time when you're at university or when you're still studying at school to just read around the subject and find what interests you. Because ultimately, what grades you get in an exam are important, but what's the most important is, do you have your own interest? Because to be able to do a PhD, for example, being smart isn't that important, really. It's just about, do you have the passion and do you have the fascination to keep yourself going through, repeating experiments that fail over and over again, and all these different things. So yeah, that is what I would say would be my main advice. And yeah, I think that's it. So I hope that was useful, and I'm looking forward to meeting all of you guys in a few weeks' time.